Hello. Today we're going to continue the discussion that we started a couple of days ago about mission to Muslims in Europe. I gave a brief talk, 30, 35 minutes or so, about some of the context in Europe and also about some of the challenges coming down the road and some of the reasons why Muslims are converting to Christianity. And so I got some questions from the students, and I love that. I am happy to do my best to answer these. So here goes. I might not get to all of them because some of them overlap with each other, but let's jump in. So first of all, what specific aspects of Christianity need more emphasis given the hopelessness of secular culture? I think that what we need to emphasize is the existential goodness of the Christian faith. Um, Jesus saves. Yes, he saves from our sinfulness. He saves from alienation to God and alienation from our neighbor, but he also saves us from hopelessness in that he gives us purpose in life. A lot of the young people in Spain, and young, I mean, I don't know, 40 and lower, I guess. So that's maybe not young, depending on how Americans define it. But a lot of people in Spain, they just pasarla bien, which is Spanish for like, oh, let's just have a nice time. The name and philosophy for this worldview is hedonism, that basically the good life is the life that is characterized by pleasure. But this is not really working very well. And the traditional things that gave meaning in life, family, children, being a respected member of your society and community, um, these things are less and less common and less well respected. So I think that telling people that accepting Jesus and becoming a disciple of Jesus, you are joining a team, you're joining a community, the church, that has a very important and valuable mission in front of it, which is working towards the apokatastasis. This is a Greek word. It means the restoration of all things. It appears one time in the book of Acts. But we are working towards the restoration of all things. That is what God is working towards. And God does not want to do this alone. He wants to do this along with us. I taught at a university in the States for some years, and it was Catholic, but my students came from all sorts of different backgrounds. And it was interesting for me to ask them, like, well, what would you like from life? And they wanted to have a life that was meaningful. None of them wanted to be like rich. They all wanted to be comfortable. No one wanted to be poor, but they all wanted to have some sort of work that was meaningful. That's not really what work is for. And this is a really weird idea that especially Americans have, that somehow my job is going to be fulfilling to my sense of who I am. This is not what jobs exist for. And this is not how work functions. Most people do not have jobs that are particularly existentially fulfilling from them, and that's okay. That's not the purpose of a job. A purpose of a job is to provide goods and services and get remuneration so that you can support your family. I mean, this is the purpose of a job. What form of missions have been effective in Spain's context? Well, we've had pretty much everything that you can think of. Back in the days of the early Protestant mission, you had people going around, they were called colporteurs, and they would go around and sell the Bibles or portions of the Bible for very cheap and try to get the Spaniards to read them. The early Protestants here started a number of schools, and that wasn't for the sake of missionary work only. It was also because the only schools that existed were Catholic schools. And back in the 1800s and the early 1900s, many Catholic schools would not allow non Catholic students to attend. And Spain developed its public education system much later than the United States. The idea that public education is a kind of common thing that's been around forever, that's common in the USA. It's not common in many other parts of the world. So schools were another thing. People have tried everything. Evangelistic events, Christian concerts. I've seen pretty much all of these things, doing stuff online, having actually, what's really popular, believe it or not, here in Madrid, two of the most kind of creative and I think effective outreach things, ways to expose non-Christians to the Christian message. Is, and you're going to be surprised. One is the gospel choir. Spaniards are really interested in gospel music for some reason. I mean, it's something they've heard like in American movies and stuff, but they don't have it here. It's not part of their culture here. There are plenty of Africans here, which leads me to the other one, which is the African choir, one of the main churches that I'm involved with is a Baptist church, International Emmanuel Baptist Church. It is an international church, and that we have a lot of Africans, so we have an African choir. And if you invite your Spanish neighbor to one of these choir performances, even if there's like, including if there's a small homily or a small sermon or something like that, they'll come. So there's a lot of different ways that people have tried to reach out to Spaniards, but overall, getting Spaniards, and I don't mean people in Spain, I mean actual Spaniards, people born and raised here whose ancestry comes from here, to become observant, even an uphill battle. Um, so, how are mission to Muslims in Spain different from witnessing to Muslims in Nazareth? Well, I mean, Nazareth, a lot of it is the political context. Nazareth, even though it's in Israel, which is a Jewish state, but the city of Nazareth itself is 70, probably today 75% Muslim. So the Muslims have a lot of political power in the city of Nazareth. So you have to be much more careful. There's a lot of stuff that you could say or do in Spain that you would not be able to say or do in Nazareth. The other thing is, of course, meeting Muslims in Nazareth is very easy because you just walk out the door. Now, we lived in a neighborhood where most of the people were Christian, but you just walk down to the main street, and historically, the right-hand side of the street, that's where the Christians had their shops, and on the left-hand side of the street, the Muslims had their shops. That's not so much the case anymore, but that's the way that it used to be. So it was just very easy to meet Muslims. Whereas here in Madrid, you have to know the different neighborhoods. This is common to like a lot of major cities in the United States. You can go to one mall and not see a single Muslim, but then you ask someone who lives there, say, well, where do the Muslims live? Oh, they live in that neighborhood in the northwest side, and there's a ton of them there, and that's where two of the mosques are. And then you go over there, you go to the local park, and you see a lot. So in Spain, you have to be more intentional about meeting Muslims. And of course, you can be a bit bolder. Like here in Spain, we've always been very open about who we are and where we are and how to get in touch with us. The website has my phone number on it, so I just get miscellaneous calls from people. Whereas in Israel, you'd probably have to be a little bit more careful, and certainly in the actual Dar al-Islam, the Islamic countries, you would have to be more careful than that even, especially as a foreigner. For locals, they can't really throw you out; they can throw you in jail. But for foreigners, they can just say, "Okay, we're going to take away your visa, pack up, and go back to the USA or wherever you came from." How do we engage with individuals who experience dreams and visions, even if we have not previously or personally experienced something similar? Yes, I've never had a dream or a vision, but I've met a lot of people who have. I think the main thing is to take them where they are and try to figure out what do they need next in order to grow spiritually. So I ask simple questions. Do you have a church that you're attending? If they say no, I'm like, okay, let's try to find something. Oh, but I live in Tunis. Okay, let's try to find an online Arabic church that you can attend. It's not as good, but it's a lot better than nothing. Are you reading the Bible? No, I'm not reading the Bible. Okay, let's try to get you a Bible and and some accountability. So every week we'll get together and have coffee, or I'll send you an email and ask you, what have you been reading and what are you learning about? Have you been baptized? No, I have not been baptized. Okay, so like I just try to do these, and these are very simple things, reading scripture, baptism, attending fellowship. These are things that you'd want to do even with a non-Muslim, but especially with Muslims who have had these dramatic experiences of dreams and visions. Those are three of the main things that I look at. And that kind of helps me to orient myself in terms of where they are spiritually and what are some things that can help them to grow more. Another thing that you can ask is, does your family know? And this is a very sensitive part of conversion from Islam to Christianity, because families oftentimes, if you don't tell it to them in a correct and gentle and gradual manner, they can become very violent and mean. So I've seen that a lot. So to be praying, like, oh, so I want to tell my family, but I'm scared. I'm like, okay, let's be praying for them. And instead of this being an occasion of fear, maybe we can think of this as an occasion of like, oh, I've been praying for months, so that when I finally tell my dad, the Holy Spirit will already have been working in his heart. So I don't have to be afraid. And instead of being afraid of something, I can be hopeful, even though it can still be very difficult. So then we have a bunch of questions about the baptism certificates. Um, let's see here. How common is it for someone to want to obtain a it depends on the country that you're in. In Spain, it's not as common, though it does happen. But it's a lot more common, like in England and Germany and Denmark, where a lot of the Muslims want to go. And Muslims generally don't want to settle long term in Spain because the welfare benefits are not as generous as they are in other countries. But on the other hand, Spain is right here, what we call the immigrant highway, because it's right across from Morocco, and one of the easiest countries to get to in Europe is Spain. Spain, Italy, Greece. These are the three main entry points. And then a lot of Muslims will try to go on to, again, one of these countries that has a more generous welfare program. So that's why it's more common in those countries. I wrote a book that has a whole chapter on this topic. It's called "I Will Give Them an Everlasting Name: um, Pastoral Care for Christ Converts from Islam." And there's a whole chapter on baptism. If anyone is really interested in actually working in this area, just email me and I'll go ahead and get you a free Kindle or PDF of the book. Or you can have your library buy it, which would be fantastic too. I will give them an everlasting name. So you have to be gradual. You have to be slow. It's good to baptize them in groups of people rather than baptizing a single person alone. That helps to form what we call in anthropology communitas, so a sense of community. When you go through a training program together, like think of, oh, the people I ministered with in college, or people who go through military training, like they tend to be very closely bonded to the people that they did this with, because it's a time of intense fellowship and interdependence. And so that's why it's good for people to be baptized, not just one off, although sometimes you have to do that. But to be baptized in groups of people, because then they can encourage each other throughout the years to remain faithful to following Christ. In the end, I'm not like overly cautious. I'm cautious, but I'm not overly cautious about the baptismal certificate issue. In the end, it's God. God is the one who knows the heart of a man or a woman, not me. And if somebody is going to be that deceitful and lie to me, and then make a be deceitful in the presence of a whole church, and saying that I accept Jesus Christ, I believe in the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. If they're going to do that, I mean, I'm not a mind reader. I don't have any way of knowing what's actually in their heart. So then that's between them and God. And I would hope that people would not do that. But if they stick with it, they're patient, they're faithful. All that I can judge them on is what they actually do. I see them trying to live a moral life. I see them, reading scripture and taking part in the Bible studies, preparing for baptism. What can I do? Again, I cannot read minds. I don't know what is in the heart of a person. So that's kind of my own input on that question. It is a big question. So let's see. We have what would the missionaries do in response to possible persecutions from unwelcoming Muslims in Europe? So yeah, persecution from Muslims in Europe is growing, and oftentimes the political powers, the state, is complicit in this. And this is something we're seeing a lot in the UK right now, where if Christians try to exercise free speech, the police will come and shut it down. But if Muslims take over a whole intersection for salat, and that means stopping all the traffic for 25, 30 minutes, the police will stand there and protect them. I'm not being alarmist. I'm not angry about this. I'm not upset about this. I don't think this is very healthy, by the way, but this is just the context here in Europe. We don't really see this in Spain at the moment, fortunately, but you will find it in other some other parts, especially larger cities. So, what do missionaries do in response to possible persecutions from unwelcoming Muslims in Europe? Well, you have to, I would say, have a good awareness of your security situation. This is basic training that almost all missionaries have to undergo nowadays, even in Europe. Even in Europe, that doesn't make as much sense as it used to, because again, if you're in a large European city, you're almost always going to have a substantial and growing Muslim population. There are some exceptions, but not many. So make sure that you have some basic security training. Um, Make sure that you have contacts with the local police. I mean, if you are actually being threatened physically, make sure to have access to a safe house. So a good ministry that I've worked with in the past that does this sort of thing is called Open Doors, founded by Brother Andrew. That's if anyone needs to write a a research paper on a great missions agency or a mission organization, Open Doors is a good candidate. They're very great advocates of freedom of religion, first during the time of communism, and then now during the time of the growth of Islamic political power in the West. So oftentimes, Open Doors, they'll have a safe house. So if you have like this young lady who's been coming to your church, and all of a sudden her brother finds her Bible or gets upset with her and threatens her or beats her, or her father does this or her uncle does this, or and she needs a safe place to stay, then that would be an option. But the point is, you want to have all of this already. You want to be aware of these things already so that you don't have the problem. And then you're like, oh, what's a place where we could have, if there are riots in the city, what's a place where me and my wife could meet if we had to go outside of the city? Like when we lived in the Middle East, our place was in Cyprus, which is relatively easy to get to from the Middle East. And we were just know if like communications go down, we can't talk with each other. She's with the kids. I was traveling in Jerusalem, and everyone has to get out of the country. Where are we going to meet? Cyprus. So that was from being in the Middle East. Spain has a different protocol, but anyway, those are just some basic security issues and security questions that you want to be aware of. Why are Muslims so anti-Semitic? Well, the short answer is the Quran. I mean, the Quran is just a very anti-Semitic book, and anti-Semitic. That's kind of a not the best word, because I mean, technically, Arabs are Semites. I mean, both Arabic and Hebrew are Semitic languages, as is Aramaic, which the day-to-day language our Lord and the apostles would have used in most places. But yeah, anti-Jewish. Why are Muslims so anti-Jewish? Well, and there's also the whole establishment of the state of Israel. I mean, and if you want to, you can Google this, the Six-Day War. You had all these different Arab nations that were sure that they were going to be able to beat up this little Jewish country of Israel, and Israel won. So you have this balance of um, not really balance, but you have this aspect of like, we were humiliated by the Jews, yet the Quran is clear that Muslims are the best people in the world. Again, this is not anti. This is from the Quran itself. Antum khair al umam. You are the best of all people. So it's hard. I think it's hard for Muslims to balance this out. The fact that okay, we're better than Jews, but the Jews, at least in Israel, clearly have the upper hand. So I think that there's a psychological, emotional, historical element to that. But I mean, the ultimate answer is just right there in the Quran. And finally, what factors cause Muslim societies to do so poorly, leading to Muslims leaving? Yeah, well, look at what makes a society healthy. You want to have a good educational system. Islam does not encourage asking hard questions. Islam does not encourage critical thinking. Indeed, there is a hadith from the Prophet who said, if you have questions about Allah or questions about religion, that's because Shaitan, the devil, came and put that in your head. So this does not encourage people to think creatively. It does not encourage people to try to discover new things or to invent new things. There was a time, what's usually called the Abbasid or the Islamic um, Renaissance, when there was a lot of discovery going on, but this was very early on during the period of Islam, the Abbasid Caliphate, based out of Baghdad. Some people call it the Baghdad Renaissance. And this was indeed an important time. But the thing is, that happened under Islamic rule, but most of the scholars who were doing translations and stuff like that, most of them were not actually Muslims, or if they were Muslims, they had converted from Judaism or Christianity to Islam in order to get the higher up positions in the government. So, so even though that happened under Islam, under an Islamic ruler, first of all, the Sharia had not been completely codified by then, and second of all, the whole educational system still had a strong Jewish, Christian, um, Zoroastrian element to it. So, but once the Sharia really takes roots in a place, we tend to see that invention and the willing to discover new things gradually declines and goes away. And again, this comes right from Muhammad himself. If you have a question about religion, the thing is, if you can't ask questions about religion, then you train your mind. I'm not going to ask questions about religion, so also I'm not going to ask questions about, I don't know, bridges. I'm not going to ask questions about automobiles. I'm not going to ask questions about transportation. I'm not going to ask questions about economics. If you train yourself not to ask questions, you can't just isolate it to one area of your mind. It has to apply to all of them. Now, there were great exceptions to this throughout Islamic history. People who did ask questions and people um, who did want to explore and discover new things. But relative to the population, you're going to find many, many fewer of these people in Islamic societies than in Jewish or Christian societies. I mean, very famously, there's like something like 10 times more Jewish people who have received the Nobel Award than Nobel Prize than Muslims, even though Muslims are about, I don't know, a third of the world population right now, going on a third of the world population, and Jews are like 12 million in the whole world. I mean, it's a very small number. Anyway, and in terms of politics, you have this idea of nepotism in politics. In terms of economics, the economic model of the Islamic world did not develop because they didn't have this idea of inventing new things. So in the West, we invented what was called companies or corporations, where a bunch of different people could own shares of a corporation and they could invest in it. And then that corporation or company could say, okay, we're going to establish a trade route with the West Indies. We're going to drill for petroleum in Persia. Like, this is standard stuff that we're all used to. Like, if you really like Tesla and you want to buy a share of Tesla, you put together whatever it costs to buy a share. I don't know, a couple $100, and you can buy a share of Tesla. You can own one share of Tesla or Apple or Microsoft or ExxonMobil. This idea in the States is in the West is very common. In the Muslim world, now it is common. They have stock markets. But for a long time, a corporation or a company could be no larger than something that could belong to a single family. So you didn't have ways of incorporating people from different places and different ethnic backgrounds and getting the most skilled people. You had to leave the company to your son. Or if you say, well, my son, he's not very competent. He's a nice guy, but he doesn't have a mind for business. That's too bad. That's the Sharia. The Sharia has an entire system for wills and testaments. If you're a Muslim, you don't get to decide who gets what when you die. It all goes, it's all according to the Sharia. So you can't say, well, I've got this son over here who's got a great wife and a family of 6 kids and is working hard, and I want to leave him the home and 80% of my wealth so that his kids can go to college. And then I've got this other kid here who sits around smoking pot, eating pizza, and playing Xbox all day. And even though we've really tried to help him, he doesn't do anything. So if I leave him a bunch of money, he's just going to waste it. So in Islam, you don't get to choose. It's just how it is. So the legal system of Islam is another aspect of why the economic situation in the Muslim world has been so poor for so long. So all of these things together, these might seem like kind of nitpicky things, but they do add up, and they all influence each other. If you don't have a good educational system, it's hard to have a prosperous economic model. And then, of course, politics. Um, the whole political idea behind a democracy is that humans are sinners. So, because humans are sinners, you don't want to let one guy have all the power or one branch of the government have all the power. So, this is why, like in the United States, and Europe has different variations on this, or maybe we have variations on Europe. But that's why in the States you have the city government and the county government and the state government and the federal government, right? So that not one guy is running everything. And then within that, you have the executive, the legislative, and judicial. So one branch of the government isn't running everything. Now, I'll leave it up to you to decide how well that's working right now in the United States. That's not my topic that I've been asked to speak on. But that is basic. That idea of like, let's make sure that one guy doesn't have all the power. That comes out of Christian theology. That comes out of the Christian anthropology that says the heart of man is deceitful above all things. Jeremiah something, I don't remember the verse. Um, All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Or Ecclesiastes says, I saw that God made man upright, but man has gone in search of many schemes. So, like this idea that there's something wrong with humans, and if you give them all the power, it's going to corrupt them. But in Islam, the ideal government is to give all the power to one guy, and that's Muhammad. I mean, that's exactly what he did. It was very nice for him, and the Islamic world, even when they have written nice constitutions that were democratic or that were republics, or the word republic is from two Latin words, res publica, republica. It means a country that belongs to the people. It doesn't belong to the monarch. It doesn't belong to the royal family. It doesn't belong to a particular tribe. It belongs to the people. It's a nice idea. Yeah. Um, so that politically is I think the main reason. Everything goes back to Muhammad. Islam is, I said this in one of my books. Islam is the psyche of Muhammad projected on 30% of the world population. Um, Islam is not really about Allah. It's much more about Muhammad than it is about Allah. And if anyone disagrees with that, I'm happy to explain and unpack that for you if you want to. In any case, these are great questions, students. Thank you so much. Again, if your college or seminary library does not have that book, I will give them an everlasting name. Just tell your librarian, hey, we'd love to have this, have access to this, and then you'll be able to read more on the question of how do you come out to your family that you have become a Christian? Very sensitive question. Um, the question of maybe the role of the Nicene Creed in the formation of a Muslim disciple. The question of how do you balance this question in terms of security, sincerity, and baptism. So that's all in there. It's a short little book. It's like 130 pages long. So I commend that to you if you're in the midst of doing ministry to Muslims, or if that's something that you want to do down the road. And I just want to encourage you, make Muslim friends. You don't have to have a PhD in Islamics. You don't have to know the Quran really well. You don't have to speak Arabic or Pashto or Urdu or anything like that. Um, the main thing that draws Muslims to Christ is really just the sincerity of a Christian friendship and seeing you live your life out with integrity and embodying the fruit of the Spirit, embodying Christian ethics.